What if Phil Lynott had walked into Thin Lizzy's final rehearsal in 1983 and said, "Enough, I'm getting clean"? Well, we will never know because that didn't happen. Here's his story. Philip Paris Lynott was born on August 20th, 1949, in West Bromwich, England, to a Guyanese father he barely knew and an Irish mother named Philomena, who couldn't raise him herself. By the time he was 4, he was living in Crumlin, a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Dublin, raised by his grandmother. His father was absent. His mother was across the water in England. He was, from the very beginning, someone who had to build his own sense of belonging. He was also, in the Dublin of the early 1960s, one of the only black children in his school. Ireland was not a diverse country. Crumlin was not a tolerant neighborhood by design. And yet Lynott turned that outsider status into something magnetic. He became the most popular kid on the street by force of personality alone. Funny, charismatic, larger than life in a way that had nothing to do with size. He discovered poetry. He discovered rock and roll. And somewhere in the collision of those two things, he found the thing he was going to do with his life. The loneliness that came from never quite fitting in didn't break him. It gave him something to write about for the rest of his life. By the mid-1960s, he was playing Dublin's bars in a series of local bands, most notably Skid Row, where a young Gary Moore played guitar alongside him. Moore was already technically formidable. Lynott was something different, a frontman who wrote lyrics the way Irish poets wrote verses, full of characters and longing and street-level mythology. He wasn't just a rock singer, he was a storyteller who happened to plug in.
But don't play with me, 'cause you're playing with fire.
In 1969, Lynott formed Thin Lizzy in Dublin with drummer Brian Downey, his friend, since school, and guitarist Eric Bell. From the start, the band was built around Lynott's vision. Twin guitar harmonies, Celtic mythology, working-class characters, and a bass style that was fluid and melodic in a way that bass playing in rock simply wasn't at that time. He was not a background player. He was the center of everything. The early years were a grind. Thin Lizzy spent the first half of the 1970s scratching for traction, releasing albums that received solid reviews and modest sales.
Don't believe me if I tell you that I wrote this song for you.
A cover of the traditional Irish folk song Whiskey in the Jar reached number 6 in the UK in 1972 and gave them their first real taste of chart success, but the band and Lynott both resented it slightly. It felt like a novelty hit rather than a reflection of what they were actually capable of. Lynott wanted more. He always wanted more.
Now some people say that ain't right, and some people say nothing at all.
Here is something that surprises us every time we check our analytics. More than 90% of the people watching this video right now are not subscribed. 90%. Stories like Phil Lynott's don't get the attention they deserve. That's why this needs to reach further. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, share this with one person who should hear this story. Now let's continue.
'Cause my baby, she had a baby by me. She might think it over one more time.
The lineup that would finally deliver it came together in 1974 when twin lead guitarists Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson joined the band. The four-piece that resulted had a sound unlike anything in rock at the time. 2 guitars weaving around each other in harmony, Lynott's bass holding the groove, Downey's drumming tight and powerful. They toured relentlessly, playing anywhere that would have them, building a live reputation that was becoming impossible to ignore. Night after night, city after city, Thin Lizzy were winning over audiences who had never heard of them and leaving with fans for life. In 1976, everything broke open. The album Jailbreak was released in March, and within it was a song called The Boys Are Back in Town. It reached number 12 in the United States, the only time Thin Lizzy would ever chart that high in America, and number 8 in the UK. Radio programmers played it constantly, and with good reason. It had a guitar riff that lodged itself in the brain on first listen, and Lynott's lyrics turned what could have been a simple party anthem into something with weight and texture, specific characters, a sense of place, the feeling of a neighborhood reunion that was somehow both joyful and slightly dangerous. Lynott was by now one of the most distinctive figures in rock. 6 feet tall, impossibly stylish, wearing his afro and his skin with a confidence that was genuinely unprecedented in the genre. Scott Gorham later said that on the first day he walked into rehearsal and saw Lynott, he thought, this is not what a rock bassist looks like. And then Lynott opened his mouth and played, and Gorham understood immediately that everything about this man was going to be on his own terms. The hits continued. Jailbreak, Don't Believe a Word, Dancing in the Moonlight, Waiting for an Alibi.
And your heart is just like that promise made to be broken.
The 1978 live album Live and Dangerous was voted the greatest live rock album of all time by Classic Rock Magazine in 2004. Lynott was also a poet in the literal sense. He published 2 books of verse, Songs for While I'm Away in 1974 and Philip in 1977, and his lyrics drew from Irish literary tradition, from Dylan, from the streets of Crumlin, from a mind that was restless and hungry and always reaching for the next image. He was writing about identity, loneliness, and belonging long before those words became fashionable in rock criticism. But the same restlessness that made him extraordinary made him vulnerable. Heroin arrived in the Thin Lizzy. Whirled gradually, the way it tends to arrive. At parties, on tour, in hotel rooms at 3 in the morning, when the adrenaline from the show had nowhere to go. By the late 1970s, both Lynott and Gorham were using heavily. The music was still strong, but the engine underneath it was beginning to corrode. The band made it to 1983 before the weight became too much. Thin Lizzy played their final show at a festival in Nuremberg in September 1983, and then it was over.
Baby, please don't go. Baby, please don't. Baby, please don't go.
Lynott lost the band that had been his identity, his family, his reason. The following year, his marriage to Carolyn Crowther collapsed, taking his 2 young daughters out of his daily life. He was left alone in a Richmond flat with his habits and his ambitions and not much else. For a man who had spent his whole life constructing a sense of belonging out of thin air, losing both at once was a blow that went far deeper than career disappointment. He tried. He formed a new band called Grand Slam and began writing material, but record labels wouldn't touch them. The members were too visibly deep in addiction. He released 2 solo albums that showed flashes of the old brilliance but failed to connect commercially. Then came the cruelest blow. Live Aid in 1985, organized by his friends Bob Geldof and Midge Ure, could have been the comeback moment. A global stage, a sympathetic crowd, one performance to remind the world who Phil Lynott was. His name was not on the bill. Geldof later said there was no room for artists who hadn't been selling millions of records. Darren Wharton, Lynnott's keyboardist, said he never fully recovered from the snub. The last months were a slow disappearance. His solo single 19, released in late 1985, went nowhere. He retreated into his Richmond home. On Christmas Day, 1985, while opening presents with his daughters, he collapsed. His estranged wife drove over 100 miles to reach him and took him to hospital. He was diagnosed with septicemia, the result of years of intravenous drug use destroying his body from the inside. On January 4th, 1986, Phil Lynott died of heart failure and pneumonia. He was 36 years old.
I'm bad, 19. And you wanna go on and high.
The tributes came from everywhere, but the grief had a particular quality to it. Not just sadness at the loss of someone great, but fury at how preventable it had been. Scott Gorham, who got clean and survived, later said, Lynott should be here collecting awards himself. He's had to collect them on his behalf for 4 decades now, and it still, in his words, pisses him off. In 2005, a life-size bronze statue of Lynott was unveiled on Harry Street in Dublin, just off Grafton Street. Every year since his death, a tribute festival called the Vibe for Philo has drawn musicians and fans to celebrate his life. The Boys Are Back in Town remains one of the most recognized rock songs ever recorded still played on radio stations that weren't born when it was released. And the thing Lynott represented, a black Irish kid from Crumlin who became one of rock's great poets on pure force of talent and nerve, has only grown more significant with time. He was a pioneer who never got to see the full weight of what he had done land in the culture. That part came after. He was the first. And there is still, decades later, nobody quite like him. Phil Lynott wrote about outsiders, dreamers, and street corner warriors because he was all three. He built something extraordinary from nothing, then watched it slip away one night at a time. The music never slipped. It's still here, still strutting, still aching, still unmistakably his. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and subscribe for more.
But don't play with me. Don't believe me if I tell you that I wrote this song for you.
Now some people say that ain't right. And some people say nothing at all.
Oh, my baby, she had a baby by me. She might be. And your heart is just like that promise